Okay, good morning. So we're up to Siman Kuf Samach Beis Halacha Dalet. Now, these are halachas which are not going to be so relevant to us, I think, because, again, we're talking about a situation where you've got a very small amount of water, exactly a Revi'is of Water, and you pour a bit on your hands and they become tomei, but you'll see there are some things which will be relevant to us. The eitzah is just use a lot of water, pour a proper Revi'is, proper water over each hand, and you're safe. That's generally the rule. But we'll see what I'm referring to. So take a look at Sif Dalet. Shofach mayim al yodei achas v'shifshef v'chabechereta. So you poured. We're talking about a case where you have exactly Revi'is, and you poured a little bit of water. You had some dirt on your hands, and you wanted to remove it, and then you put that shofach mayim al yodei v'shifshef v'chabechereta, and then you rubbed your other hand. Now remember, if you poured some water on your hand, that water is tomei. You were meshafshef, if you rub the other hand, you've now been metame the other hand. Or chshivsha nitmas chaverta, you've now been metame the second hand. Ve'ein mayim shniyim metarim ela mayim shenitnu machmas hayad atzmo v'loi haboy machmas hayad ho'acheres. And therefore, the water that's going to metay this is not going to help you. Hilker chashoifech me'akli al yodei achas v'shivshe bechaverta. Therefore, if you wash with one hand and you touch the other hand, sorich l'nagev yodov v'lachza v'litim koroi. The only eitzah is to dry that second hand and to wash again properly. Lefichach, therefore, hanoitel yodov sorich sheyishpoch le'acher aleihem. In a situation where you've got exactly a small amount of water, get somebody else to pour it on your hands. And if there's no one else, you sort of somehow you hold the kli with the top of your fingers and you pour on your own hands, on two hands together. It's quite difficult to do that, I guess. Or pour on each hand a Revi'is. And once you've done that, then you can rub the hands together. Because if you pour Revi'is at one go, then you don't need, like I said before, a second pouring letaharam. Because if you do Revi'is in one go, that's like a tevila that doesn't need a shtif two pourings. Okay, let's stop there and do the Mishnah Berurah till there. Sif Kotan Lamed Beis. Shofach mayim, Mairi. This sif is talking about k'sheshofach rak mayim rishonim mixas me'arevi'is. You pour some of the revi'is onto your hand, al yad achas onto one hand, v'shifshefa b'shniya she'ena netula, and you rub the second hand which has not been washed yet. Yeah, dangerous thing to do. Shouldn't have done that. Because he thought for some reason, this guy thought that if I pour over one hand and then I take the water and with that hand and I sort of rub the other hand, that will do the trick. It didn't. Wrong. And so too, and so too, if he did it in order to remove dirt, or his thumb, he just touched it. Also. That touching, that sort of wetting of the second hand has not been effective for Netilas Yadayim purposes. For gam yodo nitmas k'miniyos b'chaverto chudel. Not only that, you've been metame the hand. Lamadalad nitmu demayim rishonim chashuvim tmeim, because the first bit of water that touched the first hand a tmeim. The nitmu be'ez hanatila b'negiyosim b'yodav chanal b'sif beis, like we said previously. Lamadhei koshishivsha nitmas, and when you've rubbed the other hand, it becomes tomei. V'gora al yidei tumazu shekibla ato yosa mimmeim lo hoya natila nzula klal. And in fact, it's worse than if it wasn't washed at all. Why? T'mayim hatmeim shebo al yodoi, because the tomei water that has now touched the second hand, afim yishbech aleim kama kapim lo yitarach shinagum mekoidem, because you can pour lots of water on, it's not going to help until you've dried it. Because the Mefarish HaRosh, like the Rosh explains. There's the Mechaber explains. That's quoting the Rosh. Chaverto memela gam hi atzma nitmeis v'tzorich l'nagvu gamkein. And now memela, the first hand has also become tomei, and you've got to wash that as you got to dry that as well. But it's gone backwards as well. It's been metame from the original, but now that you've you made it tome from the other source, i.e. the second hand, you've got a problem. And so too, the same would happen if you pour mayim rishonim onto your two hands, kol achas b'fnei atzmo, separately, for shifshim b'zeh b'zeh, and then you rub one hand against the other, nitzmu b'zeh b'zeh. You haven't done a proper natila, and therefore you've been metame each hand. And therefore your only eitzah is to dry the hands and start again. Hilkach hashofech rotzolema sivkot lamed zayin. Rotzolema hail the nitmas chaverta umemele gam hi nitmas al kein tzorich lenage v'shtei yodem etchila v'lachsav nitman gedin. The only eitzah is to dry your hands and wash again. Ubeloi nigov loy mahani, without drying your hands first, it's not going to help you. Afi mishbech aleim kama pa'amim v'chanal, like we said previously. Lefichach hanoitel rotzolema. Since you've got to be very careful not for one hand not to touch the other hand before you finish natila, it's very easy to slip up on this. Better thing to do is one of the following three things. Either get another person to pour onto you, or you do this thing that you pour onto your hands, but like you rest them on your fingers, like the Mechaber explained. Or you pour a whole revi'is on each hand, because then that's totally metaher the hand, and there's no mayim tameim on your hands at all. And then touching one hand and the other is not mekalka, it's not going to mess up things up. And it's a mitzvah actually to rub them together afterwards. Because if you pour on two hands when they're held together, it's as if you've done on one hand. The next sif we're going to talk about that. If you've got limited water and you've got two people or whatever, maybe they will put their hands together, you pour on top of them, and that will do the trick. Because if there's another person there, because it's much easier to get another guy to pour over your hands rather than you try and do this trick of holding the water and tipping it over your hands. It's very hard for the water to fall all over your hands in the correct way. It's sufficient to have one revi'is for shuv ein tzorich mayim shnim letaram. Then you won't need any more water because you have one revi'is over your hand in one shot. That does the job. Or hold the keli normally for yishbech al kol yad v'yad b'fnei atzmo revi'is v'basachas, and on each hand pour a revi'is one in one go. V'im yishbech revi'is rak al yad achas, and if a revi'is goes on one hand to kabel tuma al yedei negyosa b'chaverta, then that by touching the other hand you're going to make it tomei. V'achach yishav shefim al kol hanizkan elkoi v'rotzolem b'da'ifanim elu su ein chashash kilkol adei hashivshaf. If you wash your hands properly, then afterwards, then touching them together is not a problem. Shashefich rotzolem v'al yedei zeh, turning over, nigmar kol taras hayadayim v'shuv ein chashash klal yedei negyosim elu b'elu. If you pour, a revi'is in one go over both hands, then we're not worried about hands touching each other. Okay, now back to the Mechaber, top line on the top of the page, 116. Im noga bohem acher shaloi notzal yodav ba'idin lachos min hamayim. Now, imagine your hands are still wet and somebody else comes and touches your hands, which is not uncommon. This does happen. You wash Netilas Yadayim, your hands are still moist, and somebody else comes and touches your hands, you've got a problem. Tzorich lenogvam v'lachs over little. You've got to dry them and rewash. Shaharizet timom al yidei hamayim she'aleihem, because this guy has been metame your hands because of the moisture. Lochein tzorich lizoy, therefore you've got to be careful. K'sheshefich mayim shlishis sheim shniyim levad me'arishonim. The Mishnah will explain what that means. When you pour a third time, aside from this is the second washing after the initial washing. Shelo yiga yad bechaverta, don't touch another hand. Ad sheyishbech gam zeh al hashniya. Oy yishbech mitchil ashten kechod, or just pour water on both hands initially. If each hand had the revi'is from the outset, you haven't got any problems. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what does that mean? Memhei im noga bohem. Even though you've already washed your hands, gam b'mayim shniyim, even a second time, so your hands are tahar, but they are wet. Or you use revi'is in one go. Your hands are properly tahar. Kiven shenoga bohem acher shelo notel yodov, since somebody whose hands have not been washed have touched your wet hands, then they've become tomei, and therefore tzorich l'nago v'lachza v'little koroyu, and therefore you've got to wash them again. I'll tell you when this can happen. When you're when you're handing the keli, to somebody else, sometimes your hands will become tomei by touching them. Yeah, so your hands are still wet. You haven't dried them yet, and okay, so you have to just be careful of that.
What about for kids?
Oh, we're going to say. He says. We'll get there. We'll say there. 33. Very good. Yeah, 33 says afidu ben yomei. Afidu mnogabo and tinuk ben yomei. Even if you touch a kid who's even a day old, hilchas katanas says shagam Netilas Yadayim. Yeah, and what about touching a nochri? Why you're giving him the keli? I don't know. Because it's not shaykh for them. Okay, so there's a suffix about that. But even for a baby, that would be a problem. Okay, memvov alidei hamayim rotzolei meshamayim nitzmu b'negyosim metamanei yadayim. Right, like we said, sheim shniim sherishenim boim rak lahos halichluch. So we're talking about a case where the initial water was removing dirt, like we said in Sif Beis. Shelo yigad yad b'chaverta shechaverta kashe'ein oleh rak mayim rishonim halutimem hem u'metamenes yoda rishona. Like we said, ubediyeved im nogan, if you did, yesh omer she'ein tzorich lenagvo rak noisen achkach mayim aloha pamachas, just pour water over it once. V'kiven shekva ho yitorim legamrei afal pi shenitmu miyad acheretz mahani mayim ashnim netarim. The second pouring will help. V'yesh omerim debezeh. The gam bezeh tzorich lenagvo kumei benoga bohem acher. Okay. Ach tzorich lechol. Sorry, ein tzorich lechol zeh. Rotzolem. What does that mean at the end? Kumei shekosav koidem. The ein tzorich mayim shnim umut tekev l'shavshim zeh bezeh. You don't need. You don't need. Sorry, I've lost the place. Ein tzorich lechol zeh. Again, mem tes. Rotzolema. Kumei shekosav mikoidem the ein tzorich mayim shnim umut tekev l'shavshim zeh bezeh. If you poured sufficient water over your hands, then your hands are toher and they can rub against each other. But even still, if your hands are wet and have been washed properly, i.e. you've poured the Revi'is over each hand altogether or more, and your hands are toher, but they're still wet, again, you've got to take care not to touch another person. If you've already made the bracha of Al Netilas Yadayim, the nizkar, and then you remember, yachzor v'yitl yodav v'levarich. You remember, hey, somebody's touched my hand, so then wash again, but just don't make a bracha if you've already made a bracha. If you've taken the kli with wet hands, this is also a very interesting case. Imagine you take the kli and you pour over your right hand, and then with your right hand you take the kli, right? You've made the handle of the kli tomei from the water that was on your hand. Because the first pouring of water, again, we're talking about a situation where you poured less than the Revi'is. You didn't do it like we described. And then you touched it with your left hand. Your left hand has become tomei, and you should therefore dry it before you wash the hand. And again, the eitzah generally is for this, and generally just make sure you do a Revi'is on each hand, and then you're sorted. Or at least on each. On Ma'im Rishonim V'Shnim Al Kol Yad V'Yad B'fnei Atzmo, just pour 2 times on each hand, and then you're covered. Okay, let's just do Sifhei and then we'll leave it. Mitoich says the Mechaber Sifhei. Mitoich Ma Shekosavnu Yispoil Lecha. In light of the above, we can explain the hod the yad nitma b'shivsha chaverta, that which a hand becomes tomei when it touches the other hand. Dafka b'noitel yodei achas va'achkach shivsha chaverta, when you wash one hand and then you touch the second hand. Avalim rotzo little b'tchila shtei yodei va'achas b'noitel. But if you want to wash both hands, you've got a little bit of water, Revi'is of Water, and you want to wash both hands together, noitel, you can do that. To shtehen nechshavos kiyad achas, because when you want to wash 2 hands together, again, you're probably going to get a third person to do it for you, somebody else to do it for you, or you tip the water like we described. Then you're doing 2 hands at one shot works. because they're considered like one hand. And we're not worried about that situation of one hand being metameh the other hand. Even 4 or 5 people, they all sort of line their hands up and their hands are touching each other. We're not worried about that. And they're not metameh each other. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sifkot Nun, Shtei Yodav Ka'achas, Avol Benitzel Rak Achas. But if you've just washed one hand, V'shafach Mimena Ala Shniya, and a bit of water falls onto the second hand, Afshel Nogoba, even though this first hand didn't touch the second hand, V'nischav Mitchila Little Gama Shniya, and then but you had intention of washing the second hand, Afilu Hochi Tmeh, because at the end of the day, Tomei water has come from one hand to the other hand. V'chanal B'simen Kuf Nutes Sivov, like we said previously. Nun Aleph. But if you wash all your hands, both hands together, or a few people wash their hands together, they're not metame each other. Remember, we said previously that in that situation, not everyone needs a full revi'is. That a revi'is will help for 2 people. And a chatzi lug will help for 3 or 4 people. Rakim hispik lova alideim kol shia natilik, so long as water is going to touch all of their hands in one go. Okay, let's say that. We'll leave it at that.